kumikondolesa mulungu wanga tipemba kuti muyambe naife musirize naife mulungu wathu tamikondani tamiyamikani nthawi zino na nthawi zonse muzina ya Yesu Kristu napemphera. Amen.
Amen. Yes, thank you very much for that wonderful prayer. That was our sister Blessing from Zambia. We are also live on Facebook. If you are on our Facebook and you have any question, you can just write it in the comment section, then we'll be able to answer it. Yes, we are going to start with today's speaker. Yes, Blessing, you can continue with your report.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, you have 2 minutes to present it.
2 minutes, not 5.
Yes, 2 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to be as quick as possible. Okay, so my today's report, I'll be giving a report on some of Africa's achievements, and I'll focus most of my achievements on my country's personal achievements. So according to my researchers, just discovered that actually our continent produces quite a very high number of minerals in the whole world, which is an achievement on its own, because Africa is not only known for its wonderful natural resources, but it is filled with so much land and the wildlife that attracts people, which brings us to tourism. So getting into my country and connecting it with the point that I just spoke of, my research gives me a lot of data on Zambia's achievements. So when it comes to the economic part of Zambia's accomplishments, you discover that Zambia is actually the 7th largest copper producing country worldwide, which is an accomplishment for us. When you go to the political sector, Zambia in history has now 2 vice presidents, something that has never happened in history. And I'll take that as an accomplishment for us. It's quite a very huge achievement having to have females even in the political sector, meaning that even our voice as females is heard, not only in our homes, but even when it comes to decision making for a whole country. Getting back to the economic accomplishments that Zambia has, one other thing is that Zambia has one of the seven wonders of the world, which is the Victoria Falls. So the Victoria Falls acts as a very huge component in the tourism sector, and it's an accomplishment because people from other countries are able to come and view it, which gives us quite a good history in records of what Zambia has been able to achieve. And to conclude my report this afternoon, one of Zambia's greatest achievements is that we are celebrating 58 years of independence, which gives us freedom in us to be able to express ourselves, give our views on our social well-being. And the last thing I'll talk about that Zambia has achieved is actually having a free education policy, something that was not implemented. It was only there when we had our independence, but now it's been brought back by the current government, which is an accomplishment as well as an achievement, as well as the re-entry policy, which gives permission for the girls to get back in school after being pregnant. So it's an achievement and an accomplishment because we are able to educate each other as Africans.
Yes, you have 30 seconds left.
No, I'm done. Thank you so much, Yvonne.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. That was our sister Blessing Mzumara from Zambia. Thank you for that wonderful report. Yes, I am, because you are. Up next, you're going to have our brother, Isaac Wani from South Sudan. Yes, Isaac, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Okay, welcome. You have 2 minutes to present your report.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I love Black people community. This is Wani Isaac from South Sudan. I'll be presenting on Afrophobia in South Sudan, Africa. Be tackling some few points. Majorly, when we talk about health, that modernization is associated with it, an increase in the risk of chronic diseases, especially cardiovascular diseases, anthropological research such that has focused on unrevealing factors associated with the risk due to the modern technology. Then when you look at the health majorly in terms of tobacco use, alcoholism, and consumption of unhealthy diets that came due to the modernization. And here also most of our rich Africans prefer going for treatment to the outside world instead of building our hospitals in Africa. Those conditions are caused by the modernization that led to them fleeing to other Western worlds. When it comes to in terms of education, Africans were made to think that they are inherently poor just for the Westerners to get rid of our resources. They started that by changing our environment, which is start in the head of every African individual. By changing the way we think and act, we will create an enabling environment that facilitate and enhance wealth exploitation in Africa if they change our mind. And then when we come to socioeconomic status, globalization has caused disintegration of industries in most states that led to high rate of importation due to low production caused by the devaluation of our currencies.
Yes,
and also,
you have 30 seconds left.
Okay, in terms of language also, we understand we are currently using Western languages. We tend to forget our languages, and also when it comes to religion, we tend to really forget our real culture, because before we have our follow-up of our, we were really, so it's okay, sorry, I'm caught up with time. I'd like to stop there, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Brother Isaac Wani from South Sudan. I am because we are. Thank you for that wonderful report. Up next, you're going to have Sule Molo from Ghana. Yes, Sule, can you hear us? You can unmute yourself.
Hello, Ivan, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome. You have 2 minutes to present your.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody on this platform. Let me just summarize my point because of the time factor. As we celebrate the achievement of Africans or African countries, as I'm in Ghana here, we also have a little distance that we have achieved. Even though me as Pan-Africanist and looking at the natural resources and the human resources that we have, if I look at where we are, it's not all that good, but let me say it's somehow good as compared to some few centuries ago, as we having civil wars and those things fighting against ourselves and that order. So now it's not like that. So I see that one as one of the achievements that our country has achieved so far. And this one was also led by, as we celebrate our achievement, we should also forget our ancestors who fought for us. The most known person in the world now is Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, who led our country to independence in 6 March 1957. So which means we are 66 years now, yes. And the country is still where it is. It is very sad, but they have done something. Let us appreciate them. And for that matter, in Ghana here, we have also enrolled some programs that will also help us to maintain our peace. So we call it See Something, See Something. And it is all because of the nature of our peace or our harmony that we have, that we live with each other. As compared to then, Christians and Muslims were rivals, they were fighting, they were not uniting and those things. But now in my country here, we have now strike those wars and those things out. You see Christians moving with the Muslims and the traditionalists moving together. So I think that one is a great achievement. And as we move on, a time will come that we all unite as one people. So I am because we are. Let me end here so that someone can. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Sulemura from Ghana. Thank you for that wonderful report. I am because we are. Up next, you're going to have our brother, Shahid Kasim from Ghana. Yes, welcome.
Yeah.
You have 2 minutes to present your report.
Yeah. Good afternoon, brethren, from my African contingents. It's a privilege once again to speak on a topic the importance of preserving and promoting African languages as a means of cultural preservation and identity. Language has two main functions. It helps in communication and gives a group of people a sense of identity and pride. People usually identify themselves with a certain language. Various groups of people use a certain jargon that is only comprehensible to people within. Language also carries meaning and references beyond itself. The meaning of a particular language represents the culture of a particular social group. To interact with a language means to do so with a culture which is its reference point. Identities are symbolized through language, and languages are used to indicate identities by those who speak them. Also, it is used by people to categorize other people according to the language they speak. Language displays an essential part of life for nearly every person in the world. For that matter, as Africans, it is important that we preserve our languages. And by preserve our languages means to name our children after our local tribes, better than using the foreign language, that is English and French. It is also important that I speak a little about Ghana and current affairs. My brother Muro has said something little about our country, Ghana, and I'll continue from there. Last 2 weeks, we held a Panafest and Pan-African meeting in Paga. Paga is a border town where I reside. It was very lovely. People from the diaspora came and they gave a lot of speeches on the importance of unifying as a continent. The slave trade started here.
30 seconds left.
Yeah, okay. The slave trade started here by three great men, Bagal, Samori, and Babatu. That's by way of history. From here, people were captured down to the coast before they were shipped through the gate of no return to the foreign countries. So every year, they come here for us to celebrate the emancipation of Africa. For that matter, this is a little I can say about current affairs. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I am because we are.
Yes, I am because we are. Thank you very much for that wonderful report. Up next, we are going to have our brother, Clement Chazanga from Zambia. Yes, can you hear us? You can unmute yourself.
Hello?
Yes,
Yvonne,
yes, we can hear you.
Yvonne,
Yes.
are you there?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, this is Clement.
Yes,
This is Clement
you have to present yourself.
Chazanga. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay. I'm trying to make sure that I connect with the internet correctly.
Yes.
Okay, is it? Okay. So my submission to that, how many minutes do I have, Yvonne?
Yes, you have 2 minutes.
You have 2 minutes?
Yes.
I have 2 minutes, okay. I thought I had 3 minutes.
Me too.
The first thing that I would mention and say is that in 2 minutes time, I'll really not mention what was so much in my heart. As you can see that all the Black people, their hearts are bleeding. So my contribution is on the few achievements that Africa has done and what Africa intends to do. I'll not go through my report and my content, but I'll just pick a number of a few things so that I can summarize it. The first thing of all is that Africa has achieved several aspects of development, culture, social, and environmental, and political development. At this particular point, coming from a country where I'm coming from, a number of successes and achievements have been done. But I just want to remind every one of us that are here that the dimension and the change of African context in terms of development and growth is not going to be so much for me to cosmate the fact that Africa or Zambia itself has made serious achievements. And I think we need to call a spade a spade. By this time around, what we talk of 100% should not even be called 100% or 80%, but must be called maybe 10% or 20%. Today, DRC Congo is the richest country in the whole Africa, the richest country in the whole world in terms of minerals and resources. But DRC Congo is still walloped in regional conflict. There is still war in Congo. We still have a number of uneducated young Black Africans in DRC. Congo DRC produces the metal or the mineral that they use to produce all these high phones like iPhones and all that. Yet Congo DRC itself doesn't even have any industry or phone making industry just within itself. If you look at where all these minerals are coming from, it's the African and the Black child that has been subjected. Pardon?
Yes, you have 30 seconds.
All right. So basically, for me, with the 2 minutes that you gave me, I just want to remind all Black Africans to say, the achievements, much as we can celebrate, let's celebrate the ideology that our forefathers left for us, the Gaddafis, the Mugabes. When Mugabe told the European Union to say Africa must be independent in mind and has got its own value and culture, it's because we need a Black man to walk freely and to be independent. So otherwise, all in all, I feel Africa has a lot to do, and we need to do a lot as a continent. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Clement. Thank you for that wonderful report. I am because we are. Up next, we are going to have our brother, Mohammed Kamara from Sierra Leone. Yes, Mohammed, can you hear us? You can unmute yourself. Yes, Mohammed, can you hear us? Yes, I think they're having some issues with their mic. We are going to have our brother, Reginald Mutira from Kenya, sharing the report from the meetup they had this morning, today. Yes, Mutira, can you hear us? You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I can hear you all. My name is Reginald Mutira from Nairobi, Kenya. I was part of today's Black People Meet in Nairobi. I was told it was the first one. And me and the folks who were present, we were delighted to be part of the movement, where we were familiarized with what the movement is all about, how we can help the environment where we are so that it can suit Black people around us. Also, how we can help the organization. And we also discussed other things that we thought would benefit us as people. I was part of Black People Movement in Kenya, where we thought the message that is there, it's fine, but we needed to localize it so that it can be more appealing to people around here, and so that Black movement, I Love Black People movement can bear fruits if it were here in Kenya. Also, we had some challenges that we hoped they will be addressed. We aired them, and we were told maybe they will be addressed later. And we are hoping that the meetups can be more frequent in Nairobi, so that more people can join in other places, not just Nairobi, just the whole of Kenya, so that we can have more people join the I Love Black People movement in Kenya. I think that's all because I'm rushing.
Yes, thank you very much for sharing a report regarding the Pan-African meetup that took place today in Nairobi, and thank you for attending. Yes, I am because you are. Up next, you're going to have our brother, Kamara. Yes, Mohammed Kamara from Sierra Leone, presenting his report. Yes, they are having issues with their internet. Yes, so if you're not a member yet, I'm going to share the link to join us and join our WhatsApp group in the comment section. And also, if you have any question regarding the movement, you can write it in the comment section and we'll be able to answer it. I can see Abraham Brownie raising their hands. You can write your question in the comment section. Yes, and also a reminder, if you didn't download the I Love Black People Safe Places app, I'll be sharing the link in the comment section. You can download it and share safe places for Black people, where Black people will be treated with respect and dignity, where we'll be free from racism and Afrophobia. We are going to have the Pan-African healthcare class with Nana Akua. She's going to join in a few seconds. Yes, if you have any question regarding her presentation, you can just write it in the comment section. Then she'll be able to join, to respond to you. We are also live on Facebook. If you are following us live on Facebook, and also you have maybe a question, just write it in the comment section. Then we will go through it. Yes, if you have any question, you can write it. I can see the comments from Octavia Jones. Having a unified vision with a unique role for each person to play is the key. Conflict usually comes when someone's unique contribution cannot be seen in the vision for the whole. Yes, thank you very much, Octavia, for that comment. And also there is another comment from Asumane Kamar. We need to learn from our perspective language, not Western ones. Western languages should be just a subject as others. Yes, thank you very much for that comment too. Yes, there is another comment from Bernard Oguta. Africa is our business and we have to develop it. Yes, Tebogo, if you're having issues with your audio, you can try to drop and join again, or try to click on the join. It's sorry, let me double check it. Yes, join audio, then you choose Wi-Fi or cellular data. Yes, I'm going through your comments while we are waiting for Nana Akua to join. Yes, so Nana Akua has joined. We are going to start the Pan-African Healthcare class with Nana Akua. And if you like to receive a shout out from her, you can just turn on your camera. She really likes giving lectures while watching the beautiful Black faces. Yes, welcome, Nana Akua.
Thank you. Welcome. Good day, everyone. How's everyone doing? Oh, I see some new faces today. Oh, and it's quite a few people. What y'all been doing? Y'all did good today. Okay. Well, greetings, Abraham. And hey, Yvonne, how are you? I ain't speak to you first. How you?
Oh, okay, how about
Okay.
you?
I saw your messages, but I was doing. I was trying to get on here. She like, we ready? I ain't ready. And Octavia and Afiki and Theodora and Raymond and Isaac. Greetings, everyone. Thank you all for joining. I have not pulled up the lesson, and I actually wanted to stray. I meant to close that blind. Maybe that's okay. I wanted to stray a little bit from the lesson because I have been I've been gardening, and I have been unsuccessful with one of my crops, which is green beans. And so I have this whole little space where I don't know if it's been too much rain, too much sun. I don't know. I don't have them in the right place. And so I'm now trying to prepare for something else and some cold weather crops, which the seedlings are not quite ready yet, but just made me think to share that information maybe about warm weather vegetables and cold weather vegetables. As you all may have listened before and know that I'm a big proponent of growing our food and our medicine when possible and however possible in whatever way. If we are able to do it in the dirt, in the ground, great. However, container vegetables and herbs are also just as beneficial. I personally can't grow anything in pots. I kind of definitely kill those, but if it's in the earth, I got it. I'm usually really good with that part. But if you are not able to utilize actual soil, then you can, again, get containers. You can use old milk cartons. People have been really creative with different types of containers that they grow. People use barrels and tires and just all sorts of things that people will create raised beds or create container vegetable gardens or fruit trees or herbs or what have you in. So I highly recommend that you do that. And usually it's a matter of conditioning the soil. I've always used composted manure. These days in the stores, they have something fancy. Let's see, they call it here in the States, soil conditioner, which I don't know, I find I'm entertained by it. Plus it's probably twice as much as the composted manure used to be. And now you can't find composted manure, you have soil conditioner. But I'm sure also if you really get into it, and other folk who are veterans at this and could probably tell you what to actually use. Curtis, hey Curtis, I see he logged on. He probably would know very well maybe what to put in soil and create your own sort of fertilizer. And of course we know composting is an option, and fruit and vegetable peelings and food quote unquote waste, that we are not consuming can always be used to condition our soil and give it nutrients and those types of things. But definitely, I know that there are deficiencies in the soil as things currently are. Everybody is vitamin D deficient, and I'm sure deficient in other vitamins and minerals as well. And I know that it has something to do with the soil and the condition of our foods that we're buying. So for as much as we can control those things and take charge of those things, I think in a world where we have limitations as to what we can control, any and everything that we can grab a hold and control, I am all for that, right? You can't control how people act, not even your own children, which has been an irritant for me this morning. Even who raised these kids, right? But it's so many things you won't have control over. I just feel like anything that we can kind of snatch back our power and our control over, and something as important than what we eat, is very, very crucial to your own mental health, right? And to your physical health and well-being. So I just wanted to quickly go over just in mine, and I also was tickled at the lady at the store when I went to ask about certain vegetables, and she made it a point to, I guess, school me about why they didn't have the warm weather vegetables, as if I would not have known that we're past season for those. And she's like, well, as it gets later in the season, we won't have the things like the peppers and the tomatoes. And I'm like, I didn't ask you that. I asked you, when are the cold weather vegetable plants going to be in? Like, I didn't ask you what they were, or whether the warm vegetable plants were going to still be available for the fall and the winter. But of course, she assumed that I would not have any clue about that. But anyway, again, another one of those things you just cannot control, right? You can't control how stupid people are or how stupid people think that you are. But anyway, let me just give a shout out to our latest edition of the Global Green Book. If you have not obtained this, I do recommend it, right? And I compiled this book, most of this book, and the part that I'm referring to here, where it does talk about growing foods and healing plants. And I just simply listed out what foods are considered warm weather vegetables, which foods do we or should we plan to grow in colder temperatures or colder climates, and just to give options, because sometimes, especially if you go strictly from what some of the nurseries offer, you won't even know, oh, I could be growing okra or eggplant or acorn squash and some other things, or I could be growing collard greens and not just kale, or I could be growing arugula. So it's just to give other options, other ideas, and so I'm on the quest of, I want to grow some acorn and butternut and spaghetti squash. So typical warm weather vegetables are things like cucumbers, tomatoes, peppers, squash. Usually this is your yellow or your zucchini squash. Beans, greens, berries, sweet potatoes, southern peas, okra, eggplant, amaranth, Malabar spinach, corn, melons, shallots, things of that nature. Usually in colder seasons, or cold, some people call them winter crops, but in cooler climates or colder seasons, if we're talking about September, October, November, if you're here in the States, lettuce, spinach, carrots, radishes, broccoli, cauliflower, peas. And typically you will be able to do all the other greens, mustard greens, turnip greens, collards, things of that nature. And usually those kind of fall squashes, like the ones that I mentioned just now, pumpkin, I don't like pumpkin, but that's in the squash family. But these are things that you might expect to grow later into the year, and that they've not completely ready for cultivation in your typical August, September timeframe. But also, I know that we're in different parts of the world. In the book, there's also a Know Your Zone, not only for the US, but also for Africa. So I know that some of this I'm talking right now refers to us who have these 4 distinct seasons, which will not apply if you're on the continent, but know that they also have a zone for the US and for Africa to know what areas you're in and when is a good time to plant, and what would be the cold season or warm climate season for the different types of vegetables. And I understand there's also other plants that might be indigenous to certain parts of the world too, but certainly your local agriculturalist, gardener, farmer will, give some guidance in that as well. But I wanted to just encourage, and I didn't talk about, and what I should have added, and maybe I'll add next time into the book, is of course about herbs. So we know that, was it last week or maybe week before, we spoke about different healing herbs that we should add to our medicine chest. Know that we can grow a lot of these as well. So whether it's foods that you cook with certain herbs, or whether it's certain herbal remedies and such that you offer as part of your diet or your routine for yourself and your families, there are all sorts of herbs that you can grow very easily as well. These I do typically grow in pots, and I do okay with those, but whether it's your typical rosemary, sage, oregano, basil, that sort of thing, or it could be lemongrass or dill, or the different mints, or hyssop. I'm growing several spiritual healing herbs, rue, and now I'm forgetting tansy, and hyssop, and some other things. So there's so many options for growing our medicine and our herbs that we use for food. So I highly recommend it. So let me see if I can see what I have pulled up. And I'm trying to remember. Oh, yes, I do remember. This is the last one I spoke on last week. So last week we started going into herbs from different parts of the world, and I was sort of rounding out the conversation about herbs, but I realized that the handout I had pulled up did include handouts that I had gotten from different parts of the world. So I think that it is good to mention those. We did go over I know we did the handout on West African and South African herbs. Don't think we got to the Chinese herbs. If someone was on last week, you can remind me. I don't think we got to this. But my goal in doing this way is to talk about what herbs are indigenous to what parts of the world. And so knowing where they came from, how they were traditionally used. This is always how I teach my traditional herbalism course. I usually try to speak about where they originated. And if for nothing else, if when you travel to those areas and you're able to put your eyeballs on a particular field of ginseng or mushrooms or something, I think that would be quite interesting. In addition to maybe just seeing from the source how it's harvested, how it's used in families and homes, how it's sold in markets in different parts of the world, and not just everything already dried and encapsulated in a bottle, as we most often will get it. So the opportunity to do that. So that's one thing to add. Hopefully you're a traveler or you see the world, or even if you only see it on the internet, right? Look for the actual plants. Look for, the actual, what it looks like before it's dried and before it's put in a bottle or before it's made into the medicine that, that you have made. And then just knowing, again, its traditional uses, how it is used for medicine, some used as foods, or as we know, some of our Western culinary herbs, we know how they're used in cooking. So the same exists with some of these herbs that are from other parts of the world. So then let's talk a little bit about the Chinese herbs. I pretty much just pulled handouts that had sort of a top 10 listing of the most popular ones. So of course we know that it's not an exhaustive list. We know that there are many, many others that aren't listed. Some of these are just the most popular or most sold, but there may be other underrated. I think even here, what we commonly find or consider Western herbs or herbs native to the Americas, there are a lot of underrated herbs. And so surely this will happen in all these other categories that we will talk about. So just know there'll be others, and you may come across those. Ginseng is a kind of family of herbs. We know that there are many different types of ginseng, Panax, Korean, Siberian, American, so they're all different types of ginsengs. And we know that they have many different healing properties. They've been used for erectile dysfunction, hepatitis, menopause symptoms, high blood pressure. Most people will use it as a tonic herb, just as an overall healer, or an adaptogen, where it kind of helps your body heal from a particular condition, or boost it and prepare it to fight off certain infections. So it's many uses for ginseng. This angelica, or this dangi, personally ever used or know a lot about, that this made their top 10 list. It's used for various conditions, infertility in women, heart-related ailments, things of that nature, irregular heartbeat, high blood pressure, angina. Mushrooms, we know that there are also many, many mushrooms. We know some mushrooms are poisonous. We know that many have healing properties as well. They say there are 200 species of mushrooms found in China. 25% of them have great capacity to fight tumors, female sexual dysfunction, insomnia, and many others. They are, and it says tumors here, but we know that there are several types of mushrooms that, yes, are specifically reported to treat different types of cancers. The goji, or wolfberry, has become popular, I guess, in recent years. This is one of those foods people will usually add to their smoothies and such. Again, usually for its overall nutritional value, but it has some very specific things that it will help with. It protects the eyes, protects the body from liver damage, protects against cancer, stabilizes blood sugar, good for depression, anxiety, and for sleep. This coptis here, another one I'm not personally familiar with. It's also known as Chinese golden thread, but this is used for conditions of the digestive tract. Licorice root, which we know is also indigenous here. The Native Americans used licorice root, but we know that this is highly used in China as well. It's good for detoxifying the body. It's good for certain ailments like hepatitis, asthma, depression, cold, flu, cough, heartburn, and many others. Astragalus. This is an herb that's been used for over 4,000 years as a tonic. It enhances the immune system. So a lot of people will use it for cold and flu and that sort of thing. It also helps with metabolism and digestion. Uh-oh, I did something. Oh, goodness. What happened? Oh, sure, I hit the wrong arrow. I didn't skip something. Did it not want to show me what we were here? Oh yeah, sharks. So ginger, we know ginger is very popular. We know that this will be on several lists. So this is also on the list for here in America, the list from India. It was on the list from, I don't know if that was South or West Africa, and here it is on the Chinese list as well. So we've talked a lot about ginger, but we know it cures a lot of conditions: indigestion, nausea, blood circulation, diarrhea, cardiac issues, cold, flu, cough, you name it. Ephedra, this was also known as Marwang. This is an appetite suppressant that we've used it here in the Americas mainly for. However, in China, it's traditionally been used for asthma, cold, and hay fever. And then rounding out the list is bupleurum. Now, what they had listed here, and I had to add to this because with COVID, it became popular for its respiratory its impact on the respiratory system. But traditionally, they've used it for liver disease, arthritis, ulcers, mental health disorders. But again, it's also good for bronchitis, pneumonia, fever, flu, diarrhea, and constipation as well. The next listing here is from the Ayurvedic herbal way of living. This is based in India. They usually will use a combination of determination or a combination of things to determine what herb is best for the body. They usually use these 3 different doshas or body types to determine what herb is best for you. And in this description, you'll find that it'll talk about what body type that the herb is good for. But their top 10 list that I was able to find kind of gave us, categories: weight loss, vitality, things of that nature. I want to highlight, I won't go over all of them. Ashwagandha is very popular these days, and it's become highly used mainly for depression, mood stabilization, and that sort of thing. However, they consider it their vitality herb. So they use it as an anti-aging herb, as it enhances vitality. So people who are suffering from too much stress, they're overworked, and as I stated, the mood is irregular, there's depression, there's a need for this type of thing, ashwagandha is your go-to. Another one I'll mention, which I like because I just love this cardamom flavor in lemonade, but cardamom is considered a tranquilizer. So it's one of those herbs that brings clarity and joy to the heart and the mind. What could be better? We all need clarity and joy. And so this one is really, really good for also getting rid of excess. Well, so this gets into one of the doshas. So there's kapha, pitta, and vata. So this one is for that body type of kapha. But again, if you need to kind of calm down, soothe, or sedate the nervous system, cardamom is going to be a good option for you. Let me go to neem. Neem, which is, well, it's now present in Africa, but they say that it originated in India. But we know now you can find it in East and throughout the continent of Africa as well. But neem, they traditionally in India use as a detoxifier. So it's a blood purifier. So it helps with skin diseases, wound healing, skin damage, and those sorts of things. So you'll find that there are a lot of hair and skin products that will have neem in it. However, we also know that it's not a very pleasant smelling herb. So usually it will have some amount in it, but usually would have to be combined or added to other formulas and other aromatic essential oils and such, just to make it more palatable. But of course, we know in many parts of Africa it's used for the tropical fevers like malaria and yellow fever and those types of things. So traditionally in India, though, they use it as a blood purifier, and they use it for the hair, the skin, eyes, things of that nature. And then the last one from this list, our list, is turmeric. And this for Ayurvedic medicine is called the spice of life. So we know turmeric purifies the blood and the channels of the body. It improves skin complexion. It brings circulation and nutrition to the skin. It's an anti-inflammatory. So it treats acne and other, conditions of the skin. We know that traditionally here is used a lot of times in conjunction with ginger for arthritis pain, joint pain, things of that nature. But also know that if you use this and work with this, and it's used in a lot of foods to be the natural food coloring. So if you've ever worked with turmeric, you know that it will turn everything that it touches, yellow, gold, light orange, whatever, So I don't know how people directly put it on their skin. I called myself making a skin ointment one time with turmeric, and that was a mistake. But people from India will often say that they use it and put it on their skin every day. I'm sure they have I'm sure they have a formula for this as to how much or what have you. But my attempts to make a skin cream with turmeric in it failed. But so be careful when working with the actual turmeric root itself, or even it in powdered form, because again, it will stain. So also in this, I really wanted to, I thought I had something else here. So fine, we'll talk about painkillers. Pain is a big, big thing. So let's talk about herbal pain relievers. So we know that if we have an earache, garlic is usually a go-to. Usually you're making a garlic oil, usually an almond oil base, where you diffuse fresh garlic into it. Sweet almond oil with garlic infused in it is very common, very widely used, especially back in the day with maybe our grand or great grandparents. We know that clove is good for toothaches, whether it's the actual whole cloves that you either chew on or place in, the mouth, or clove oil can be added directly onto a tooth that is giving you some pain in your mouth. Turmeric, as we just mentioned, is good for chronic pain. Apple cider vinegar is often used for heartburn and a number of other conditions. Cherries are good for joint pain, gout specifically, or any kind of, arthritis or joint pain. This has been very useful or helpful. Pineapple is good for bloating. This is because of the bromelain that's in it, so it's good for overall digestion. But yes, if you're bloated, usually if there's overeating or some sort of food sensitivity, this will be a good option for you to take in. Peppermint is good for sore muscles. You can soak in it in terms of the essential oil, or make a strong infusion with the peppermint and soak your feet or your whole body in it. Horseradish is good for sinus pains. We know that it will definitely open up the sinuses because it does have that sort of heat to it. And so it opens up the sinuses and nasal passages. Blueberries are good for the urinary tract and a number of other things. It's a really good antioxidant. Also high in water intake, so it kind of flushes and cleanses out the body. And then of course, water. And who would think that water is good for pain, but we know how healing and cleansing that water is. And so it would only make sense that would also address pain issues. And sometimes in the midst of pain, we need to maybe just refrain from eating, right? And drinking water and allowing the body to kind of flush and cleanse itself and address any imbalances that it has. Ginger the only one not on this list here. So these are almost identical lists. So the only one that's not on this list is ginger, and we've talked about ginger. We know that ginger is also an anti-inflammatory and it's good for pain. So let me move on from talking about the herbs. I want to have all these handouts opened up here. So I think we are ready to move on. I think we've talked about all of these. But you know, if I try going and opening another one, it will not cooperate. So the next after this is, so next week we'll talk about stress and relieving stress, how stress impacts the body, the need for cleansing stress, that sort of thing. But let me, just talk a little bit about a personal care plan. This is another way to sort of take control, right? Because again, we have so many things that we can't control, but we can be prepared. And definitely one of those things is when someone becomes ill, or when we become ill, or when we have to care for someone that has an illness, whether a new illness or whether a chronic illness with some regularity or some frequency. And so this care plan I created some years ago because when we are in the midst of an illness for ourselves, or when we're caring for our children or our family or whomever, we're not always the sharpest. We're not always in a really good state of mind. And we are sort of in, let me make it better, or what do I do? So this plan, and it's, sort of simplistic, but again, as a healer for many years, helping people heal, family and otherwise, things that we know, that we've learned, we've used in the past, depending on a situation, a heightened situation, an illness, being in the midst of pain, or helping someone who is at a heightened emotional state because of an illness or because of pain or what have you, you don't always have the clarity of thought. And so this is just a way to sort of write down everything that you may use while caring for yourself or others. And so it's pretty simple. If there is a chronic condition and you suffer from, or someone you love suffers from asthma attacks, or they're diabetic and the signs of when their blood sugar is low, and there's need for attention there, or if someone's fighting a condition, fibromyalgia, or some sort of chronic pain condition, it's good to know when these things flare up, or when these things or these attacks happen, or when certain symptoms come about. It's good to have written down already these simple things. What is it that that person needs to eat? Or do they need to not eat at all? But what will facilitate the healing process? What do they need to drink? What things will help? Is it cold? Is it hot? Is it an herbal tea in particular, some combination? Is it a particular juice? What is it that brings comfort and healing to that person in that condition? What supplements or remedies is it that they need to take? So even if it's a prescription, if they have a particular medicine that they take, if it's their inhaler, some of these will be obvious, but some of these won't be so obvious. So it may be, okay, yeah, they'll take, they'll use their inhaler if they're having, an asthma attack, but also right after that, what nourishment do they need? How are they normally feeling? Are they calm? What will help them kind of get back to norm? You also always want to be able to assess how someone is feeling emotionally. Like, is it a matter of, okay, I got this, I've had these panic attacks forever, and I know how to breathe through it, or I'm okay? Or does it just, and that's probably not a good example, because you're usually not good if you're in the midst of a panic attack. But if you know that it completely wipes someone out, they feel really hopeless and they are frozen and they don't know what to do and what have you, it's good to always know how the person is emotionally. And then to be able to figure out and have already jotted down what it is that would help the person remain calm. If it's music, if it's a nature sound, if it's a smell, you know, if it's peppermint or something citrusy, you know, you make a note to, okay, turn on diffuser and put peppermint oil, you know, in the diffuser. Or, okay, let me pull out the soothing waterfall CD, or let me pull up the app that creates, you know, these pleasant nature sounds, and let me play that while they're healing. It could be any number of things. Do they like the room cool? Do they like the room warmer? You know, do they have a favorite blanket? Any and everything that you could think of that will help someone when they are not feeling well is what you would write down on this chart. My children, for example, you know, if they had something going on with their stomach, they like these outshine fruit popsicle things, right? And, you know, so they're not much eating, you know, but they like these popsicles. And these are natural, no sugar added. These are, you know, real fruit pops, not colored water sugar pops, right? But it may be something as simple as that. Let me keep those things in the freezer, or, you know, let me have on hand bananas if, you know, this is what that person can eat enough of to be able to take their medicine, or whatever the case may be. So this is just simply having everything in one place that you would need to do or use when you are assisting in your own healing or the healing of someone else. And then, of course, at what point, well, let me go back. Who is it that you need to call? Who is it that usually helps you feel better if you're going through something? Who is it that you want to, you know, have be, you know, in your space? They help bring that calmness. They help with the healing process. You know, who do you call when you're like, oh, I'm not feeling well today, or I'm having one of my, you know, attacks, or I'm having, you know, one of my episodes, or whatever the case. You may just be able to talk on the phone with them and it'd be fine. Or you may say, hey, you know, you mind coming over? I might need a little help with X, Y, and Z. And then, of course, when is it time to seek other help or assistance? At what point do you need to get to an urgent care or an emergency room or something of that nature? And then write down who it is you know that's always going to be there to help with that. So similar to who you call for support or assistance, but also, you know, some of our friends and loved ones are great with these types of things, and some are not, right? So if it's not someone who likes going to the hospital, or, you know, or they're not supportive or loving when you're sick or you're not well and whatever, you want that person that's the most doting and loving and catering, right? That's who you're going to be like, yeah, that's who I'm going to call. So always write down those types of things, so that when you know you're going to have that kind of chronic or reoccurring condition, that you're already prepared for what it is you need to have on hand and what you need to do and who you need to call. Okay, so that was just that, and we will save this part for another time. But that is the personal care plan. And so that is just having on hand what to do when you need assistance. And I am almost set. And I do have a couple minutes. So even if I don't get to answer any of these quickly, I can stay on and give a response. And of course, I kind of jumped around a couple of handouts, but if you need the handouts, you can certainly email me. Then that's the best way for you to get the handout. I understand. Okay, well, so great. I think I'm out of time, and I'll be back next week, and maybe not be a little out of sorts, and I'll have all my little handouts ready, but we will continue on with Pan-African Healthcare next week. And so have a wonderful weekend. And as always, I bid you good health and peace.
Yes, thank you very much, Nana, for this wonderful lecture. I shared your email in the comment section. If there is someone who would like to receive our handouts, they can reach out to you. Yes, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you. Yes, we're going to continue with the Pan-African history class with Dr. Tyrone Wright. Yes, Dr. Wright, can you hear us? You can unmute yourself.
Yes, I can hear you. Okay, I'm here. I just had to switch devices. I'm spoiled. My computer's right here, but I always like to use my device or phone. I don't know why. Well, I do know why, because it gives me more flexibility. Anyway, welcome to the Pan-African History and Organizing course. So I have to apologize. I was remiss. I sent the case that I'm going to talk about today and then didn't double check to make sure that it delivered. So I resent it this morning, but it's a very short case. And so it's good. I like to actually, it's nice for you to read it first, but at the same time, I sometimes like to, when we do things a little bit different, I like to talk about it first so that you have some context before you actually delve into it, so that you can kind of sort of be like, so you can say, this is what she was talking about. So to this morning, or afternoon or evening, wherever you are, I'm going to talk about the African Exclusion Measure. And I know we have to, so I'm in the process of redoing the syllabus because I think you all may know that we're expanding to, I believe, 16 weeks like that instead of like just the 8 weeks. So one topic per lecture. So I'm just going to talk about the African Exclusion Measure and put it in context. So these are two evidentiary chapters, or this is the one evidentiary chapter that I share in the context of the course that's actually from my book. I don't even have a copy of the book on hand, but it's called Booker T. Washington in Africa. That being said, this case does a couple of things. One, it identifies an actual historical piece of legislation that categorizes Blackness as criminal and undesirable. So we know this happens. We know that this occurs in American society and in other societies, but we don't have, when we say it, we're not able to just off the top cite the, piece of legislation or the document or, the historical case. This is it. I'm arming you with that. So in this case, there is a piece of legislation that is proposed to exclude anyone of the Black or African race from the United States from 1915 on to present and beyond, based on just biology, not even biology, the appearance of race and culture. So that case took place, and how it emerges is what I'll tell you. Then I'm going to share, I've already shared the document, but I'm going to open it up here so that you can see what was done and, read it for yourselves, but also for those of you who are not officially in the course or you're just viewing from online, you actually see the write-up of the case and the events around it. That being said, in November of 1914, the Panama Canal was completed. Okay, and the Panama Canal was a engineering project that had been tried by other nations, but they failed, particularly the French. what they were trying to do was cut through the landmass that is known as Central America. And at the time it was part of Colombia, so that they could open up the waterways, meaning open up the Pacific, the Atlantic and Gulf to the Pacific. So they would not have to sail around the land masses, whether it was North America or South America. They would not have to sail around those land masses, that continent, to get to the Pacific Ocean. So now you can go from west to east and trade without an extended period of travel and time. The French failed at it, but the US under Theodore Roosevelt would initiate this project to cut through Central America and open up the waterways. This would make them, the United States, when I say them, a superpower in the world, in the sense that they had the ability to trade from west to east without a lot of time, and could do it in a mass way, right? So at the time, Panama didn't exist. The United States, it was part of Colombia. The United States would fuel the rebel forces in the country against the Colombian government, which was a racist nation entity founded on slavery, like everything else in the Western Hemisphere, right? Most of the nations in the Western Hemisphere were built on the institutions of slavery, okay? So essentially, the United States, this is a rare case because the United States doesn't usually back Black rebel forces. And yeah, you should see it as that. That's what was happening. Black people in Colombia were pushing against the racist power structure, and the United States fueled them in order for them to break away. And this would be the establishment of Panama. They did this because they knew that Colombia would not agree to allow them to cut through their territory, their landmass. So with giving ownership to this group, right, rebel group, or at least rebel forces in the country, now this new established nation could be in alliance with the United States and US interests. That being said, the Panama Canal essentially is a project where they cut across the landmass, but installed these chambers, like walls that worked as locks. And they would lock, fill up with water, right? Allow water, and that would raise the ships over the remaining landmass. So essentially a ship would enter from the Gulf through the Atlantic to the Gulf, rise up in the first chamber, keep rising up in the second chamber, third chamber, over, and it's going over land. But they're using locks and water to rise the ships over the remaining landmass that they did not shave down, okay? So it was a US endeavor under Theodore Roosevelt. It would actually be successful. However, the labor on the Panama Canal would come from the African population from the Caribbean, Central and South America, okay? They did not employ Africans in the United States on this project per se. They would put their military persons on site. So there were US military persons who were also Black on the site of the Panama Canal. However, primarily the administrators of the Panama Canal, on the Panama Canal, would be white Americans, and they would be instructing and supervising the labor of the masses, who were overwhelmingly Black and African people from the Caribbean, Central and South America. It's much like, if you want to think about it and put it in contemporary context, this is, a way to avoid giving them a certain anything but money, right? No rights, no nothing, just money. We house you, you work. We pay you, that's it. Okay. So it was, because it was an American endeavor, I must say this, it was a racist operation for sure. It was the gold roll and the silver roll. The gold roll, of course, was for the white administrators who worked on the canal. They were paid in a certain way. And there was the silver roll, which were the masses of people who labored on the Panama Canal, who were African and Black people. That being said, many suffered from yellow fever. Numerous people died, primarily the Black and African populations that work on the Panama Canal. So at the point of completion in November of 1914, a senator from Missouri named James Reed would emerge in the Senate and propose to exclude anyone of the Black or African race from the United States forever. Now, why did he do this? He did this because he knew that the Panama Canal had just been completed. And in his mind, the next step they would take would be to appeal to the United States for immigration so that they could continue to earn money. His thinking was that they would have gotten used to getting paid in American dollars and at a US rate, right? Which would have been, we all know that, the dollar is not very high, but at the time, it would have been more in terms of the currency that existed in various parts of the Caribbean, Central and South America. So they are used to US wages, the laboring population, although poorly treated, overworked, exposed to disease, totally unprotected and unsecured, they had received US wages. And he theorized that they would have gotten accustomed to this and would have tried to immigrate to the United States. So his interest was in blocking them, okay? So he wanted to block anyone of the Black or African race. It was targeting African population in the Caribbean, Central and South America. However, it would have impacted African people and Black people worldwide. Okay, because the doors to the United States for identifiably Black, identifiably African people would have stayed closed from that point on out. Now, what is important to know, and I started out the lecture by saying this, is that this piece of legislation wouldn't have just locked them out. It would lock them out based on categorizing them as criminals and undesirables. So Blackness is equivalent in the context of this piece of legislation with being a criminal or undesirable attempting to enter the United States. So he proposes this in the Senate on December 31st, 1914. And I'm saying the dates because it's important just in your mind have this idea. Panama Canal was completed, and on the last day of that year in 1914, they rush to propose this piece of legislation, like before the year is out. There's only been 1 month that has passed since the completion of the Panama Canal, but before the population can even get acclimated, they are already anticipating what the laborers on the Panama Canal will do, which is appeal for immigration to the United States. Okay. And so they attempt to block this, namely James Reed, and the Senate is aligned with him at the time. There is little discussion about this. It passes with flying colors. They attempt other exclusionary measures in that same session of the Senate on December 31st, 1914, but none of them pass. And they are efforts to exclude other groups of people from Asia and other places. However, when James Reed proposes the simplest exclusionary amendment to exclude anyone of the Black or African race, it passes with flying colors, with no protest. Okay, so the measure, which was part of the larger immigration bill of 1915, it actually, just so you know, for those of you who are like real interested in the specific details, which you'll see in the case that's already in there, it is the immigration bill of 1915, and it is the 19th amendment to this larger immigration bill. Okay, so it is due to go before the Congress, the House of Representatives, the first week of January 1915. An unusual individual, and he wasn't, well, I guess you could say he was an unusual individual. An unlikely individual known as Booker T. Washington would be the person reading the congressional record and essentially decide that he was going to challenge this and block this measure to block African people and Black people from the United States, and the issue of categorically placing Blackness in the same category, same classification as undesirables and criminals, right? So once again, I started with saying that we think this, but it's seldom that we can say point and case where this has happened. And this is one of those cases where we can say we know for sure that the intention was to make an equivalent between Blackness, African culture and identity, and criminality and being undesirable. Okay, so Washington challenges this measure on 3 levels. He finds out about it, he verifies it with some administrators on the Panama Canal who were still stationed there, and then he moves into action, first by commandeering essentially the Black press, which he had significant control of. He would put a article out talking about this intention by the US Senate to exclude anyone of the Black or African race. So he utilizes the main form of communication at that time, which were newspapers, right? So we have all this other stuff now, but that was the primary means of mass communication. The other method he would use would be to directly get his words on the floor of the House through a congressman from New York named Faulkner. He also would essentially activate his secret network called the Tuskegee Machine. And there's a little controversy historically around the Tuskegee Machine because other than certain people mentioning it, there was no public knowledge. So I would say it was an underground entity because it was never meant to be publicly known that these individuals were part of this secret network called the Tuskegee Machine, which were a group of power brokers who essentially executed directives from Booker T. Washington. This is controversial because of the fact that this is the key issue that Du Bois had with Booker T. Washington. He had some anger and around the use and what he would say, Washington's abuse of the Tuskegee Machine, the secret network, to appoint, not appoint, to affirm, not affirm, to fund or defund, any number of things going on related to Black people and in the shadows of US politics. So Washington would send his lieutenants to Washington, D.C., and tell them to pull every string possible to defeat this unfair measure. They went there to attend the Congress sessions where the debate about this measure would take place. And there was a ferocious debate. This case right here that you all have, I give you some of what happens in that debate, but I've since rewritten it, and I don't know, in the future, but not so much here. I give more of a conversation, or the conversation, and really debate and fight on the floor of the House between congresspersons from North and South who would debate this bill, debate the immigration of African and Black people to the United States. From that time and forevermore. Point being, there's a couple of things that emerged that come to mind. There are people on both sides. The southern states are opposed to the immigration of African people from the Caribbean, Central and South America. Why? Because their attitude is that we will have to deal with them. We will have to put up with them in the South. We have enough Black people here. And as you all know, 1915, the institution of slavery had already been defeated, but the US system is sort of remixing slavery in the form of incarceration and peonage, okay? Declaring that an individual owes them money and essentially kidnapping people and forcing them into labor. But then the other way to replace slavery in the United States was to simply convict, charge, incarcerate people. And that is already a common practice. The chain gangs, all of that, those were prisoners building the railroads in the United States, and they were Black prisoners. That being said, these are some of the challenges that Southern congressmen are stating on the floor of the House, that basically, if we can't engage in full exploitation of this group of people, we certainly don't want any more of them coming from here, there, or anywhere, because we will not be able to exploit their labor, and they are not acclimated, or they're not, how would you say, poised for assimilation. Culturally, they felt like African and Black people were not able to assimilate into American society. And what they're talking about is that they really did not want Black people to assimilate and integrate into American society on a familial level, right? They did not want to mix Black and white people, okay? So in other words, they could not come in and marry the daughters of these men and assimilate, okay? And also they're arguing that culturally they are a different and separate group of people, unlike the masses of Anglo-Americans. So those are some of the arguments. However, there are some arguments on the floor of the House from Northern congressmen that are very interesting. One that comes to mind of many is the argument that one congressman asserted, which was that these people in this country who are classified as Black and are culturally African are an unusual group of people in the sense that they spent 250 years in enslavement. And after 250 years of enslavement, we are at the point of 50 years of freedom for them. They have risen in such a fast and stark way that if this were any other group of people, we would be praising them, because it is in fact an epic story that they emerged from slavery and achieved so much in such a short amount of time. When I read this, and I'm telling you, this is coming straight from the congressional record, I thought that that was a extraordinary analysis as someone who is a historian, because I do know world history, and there is no other group of people who had spent 250 years, and really more than that, 400 years, but 250 years at that point. Well, really, 250 years plus, let's say it that way, in enslavement. And in only 50 years, a fraction of that time had emerged and were in every area of life progressing. And the only thing that stopped this progression of this population was violence, right? Which at this time in 1915, this was the end of the nadir, but not the end of the serious waves of violence. What's the nadir? The nadir in the United States is this period from 1895 to 1915, where Southern whites in particular, but I would just say, white America engages in serious waves of violence against sustainable Black and independent communities. Absolutely terrorism, domestic terrorism. Most people know about the case shortly after this period, which is Tulsa, Oklahoma's Greenwood section. But that's the least of them. There were many sustainable, independent Black communities all over the United States post-enslavement. Why? Because please do not believe the lie that slavery was simply cotton. Cotton was king. It made them the most money. But African people were enslaved in every industry. So African people were the skilled persons in the United States post-enslavement, able to do now what they had done for others, for themselves. Okay, and so they did. And they are able to build communities because they are the holders of all the trades and skills and skill sets. That being said, instead of them being left in peace, the response by Anglo-Americans, white Americans, is to destroy, burn, and murder these very people. So when people say, well, what can Black people do? We've done it already. Just check the historical record. We've done it. But when you are in a place where systemic violence and organized waves of violence can be perpetuated against you, you also can have it destroyed overnight. Okay, so it's not, I know a lot of people think like, well, we've got to figure out what we can do. I mean, we are in proximity to people who have historically engaged in violent ruthlessness and indifference for life. So there's really not, and I'm not trying to be down, I don't want to say that, but it's more commentary on the climate, the culture that is at the foundations of US society, which is that there's a level, well, there's no level of violence that the United States in particular is unwilling to engage in, particularly against the Black and African population. And that's a historical fact. Let me just say a side note. So a lot of people, I know a lot of people in the United States are, they've sort of like equated this whole thing with Juneteenth and people acknowledging Tulsa, Oklahoma. The only reason why we should acknowledge Tulsa, Oklahoma in particular, and not in terms of, the only reason why we should acknowledge it in context of US history as a marker is because the US had always been engaging in violence systemically and otherwise against African population, enslaved population. That was the nature of the institution of slavery. However, Tulsa, Oklahoma is notable because it was, someone put in the comments, terrorism. It was the first domestic terrorist attack on the civilian population, not just by other civilians, but by the US government, okay, period. They are engaged in dropping turpentine bombs on women and children seeking to escape Tulsa, Oklahoma. So when people, you know, I always have my own thoughts when people engage in these things, revisiting history and sort of spinning and rewriting it. Tulsa, Oklahoma had the same fate as many industrial and sustainable Black communities. The only difference is that the regular average civilian white person was deputized, and the state government engaged in also destroying and killing people. Okay, that's the difference. It is the first US terrorist attack on the civilian population by the government. That's what stands out about it. Not that it happened, that the government essentially came in and flew planes over the people and helped execute this. Okay, so just a side note, I digress. That being said, Washington would be the person instructing the Tuskegee machine, the lieutenants on the Tuskegee machine who come into this particular Congress. Yes, it is on topic, but it was just kind of like, you know, a little pit stop there. But they come into the Congress and they hold up the Congress. Not with guns like the Panthers did, but they do hold up the Congress and force a polling of the Congress around this particular piece of legislation. And what would happen is now they are able to move in a focused way because they can anticipate how particular congressmen are going to vote on this measure, and therefore they can target them and directly confront and or lobby and challenge them on their intention to vote in favor of this racist measure. I want you to read the case, so I'm not going to tell you everything, but some of us, if you have any African or Black ancestry that came to the United States after 1915, you are living evidence of the defeat of this racist piece of legislation. So needless to say, Washington and his Tuskegee machine and all his efforts were successful. So you have to read the case to see how. But I tell you the main strategies and tactics used to defeat this measure. Just to extend it beyond so you can understand what it would mean for us historically and politically in terms of our transformation here in the United States, and even its impact on world politics and liberation struggles, that the very next year, none other than Marcus Garvey would enter the United States in March of 1916, 1 year and 2 months after this measure was defeated. Washington and Marcus Garvey had a relationship. Marcus Garvey was coming to the United States to see no other place than Tuskegee and its sustainable communities and its 44 industries that he had learned about as a result of the 1912 International Conference on the Negro held there. That being said, Jamaica was one of the notable places that is a subject of the debate on the floor of the Congress, okay? I actually should share it. They talk about the emergence, but I'm over time already, and I know you guys have questions, so I'm gonna stop. You can go to the case, it's already in the group. There is a notable mention of Jamaica in terms of immigration and that population that had labored on the Panama Canal, okay? And they talk about the population coming from Jamaica being in part or wholly African and Black in terms of race, and that was their intention to lock such people out. So once again, although this measure was targeting the Caribbean, Central and South America, it would have impacted the movements of African people from the continent of Africa to the United States perpetually, forever after this. But it is stopped, and it is stopped by an unlikely figure, Booker T. Washington. There are others who are aligned with his efforts, but they lack the constituted power to impact the US legislation in that moment. And so in other words, what am I saying? I'm saying people like Du Bois, who knew and read about the measure as a result of Washington broadcasting it through the Black press, of course, they opposed it. They knew it was racist in nature, but they had no constituted tool or way of opposing it and defeating it. Washington was the person who, through his entity, the Tuskegee machine, was able to directly impact how this legislation would fare in the Congress, okay? So that's the end of my conversation about the case. This is a concrete historical policy case that when people say, well, what is Pan-Africanism? This is the evidence of Pan-Africanism. Why? Because he is not advocating on behalf of simply Africans from one locale. He is advocating on behalf of Africans abroad, internationally, coming from many different nations, many different ethnicities and cultures, okay? And he could have had the attitude, if he was going to be ethnocentric, he could have had the attitude that, oh, there's Black people in this country. I mean, the others are going to come and compete for jobs. We don't want them doing that with us. We want to be the only Black people, here and to benefit from whatever we've done here in the United States. We're not going to share. We're not going to this, that, and other. But you have to understand, he was an institution builder, and he had a steady stream of students coming from the African continent since 1893. And because of his own personal interest in securing and maintaining this flow of students from the continent of Africa and from the Caribbean and Central and South America, but really particularly from Africa, and it fulfilled his mission of spreading the Tuskegee model of African sustainable communities, he was not going to allow the US government even to interrupt that, okay? That being said, so he wanted to share, where some people may say, no, we don't want to share, we're here, we don't want to share. No, he wanted African and Black people internationally to come to the US, and particularly Tuskegee, and learn and take all that they learned back to their communities and share and build them. So this was against his interest, but he was Pan-Africanist in nature. Let me propose a couple of things. If he was not clear, if he were not a Pan-Africanist, this would have been a stumbling block for him. Why? Because he would have had to learn that he and the people that this piece of legislation was an affront to were one in the same, in fact. He did not learn that in 1 week. He confronts this situation already in the knowing and understanding of who he is and who African people and Black people in the world are. And so there's no hesitation. He already had a mechanism to challenge it, and so he throws it into action in every way. And once again, his language was, go to Washington, D.C. and pull every string possible, visible and otherwise, to defeat this unfair measure. So, you know, Pan-Africanism is about, in many ways, not just getting together or being together. It is about working, doing something in the interests of our people. And when we weigh and measure this, we can say, what did we get? We maintained and we got the freedom to move in and out of this country and to coalesce with other African people globally without restriction by the United States government. Okay, because someone a couple of sessions ago, not this class, they said, well, I don't think that, you know, coming to the United States is like whatever. It's not about coming to the United States. This is a model of how, when the British or when the Spaniards or when the Italians assert racist legislation about African immigrants coming into those countries, leaving Africa and immigrating to France, to Italy, to Spain, to the UK for work. This is the posture you should assume to challenge that government that you live under on behalf of African people who seek to freely move in and out of these European nations that use their homeland as an extraction site. So this is not about everybody coming to the United States. This is the posture to assume wherever you are in the world as an African person on behalf of African people. Okay, it is a blueprint. Right? So just to make that clear, this is a challenge to racist legislation, and it's an identification of an established piece of US legislation that put Blackness in the same category as criminality, but it got defeated. Okay, so hence, some of the product of this defeat to our favor was the arrival of Marcus Garvey the very next year. Okay, it would be the arrival of people like Nkrumah, who would come to the United States and be educated at a Black college and educated here and go back and build Ghana as the first independent African nation on the continent of Africa, free of colonialism and imperialism. Okay, for those of you who love him, this is what allowed you to have your Obama. Why? Because his father, who was coming from Kenya, would have been blocked had this piece of legislation not been defeated. Now, I don't know if that's a good thing or whatever the case may be. We could debate that on another day, because legislatively, I don't know that Obama was a good thing for us. That being said, well, he's admitted that he wasn't that great for Black people. He said he could have done more. We already knew that. That being said, on and on and on, our beloved Malcolm X. No Malcolm X in the United States, whose mother came from the Caribbean, whose mother's ancestry came from the Caribbean after this time. On and on and on and on and on. I could, run the list of African people who came to the United States and contributed to our tireless struggle and march towards liberation that would not have been able to embark and arrive in the United States without the defeat of this racist piece of legislation. Okay. So two things you got. This is a concrete case of this defeat, this piece of legislation being defeated, but it also is a historical benchmark where we clearly see an attempt to make Blackness criminal, right? To equate Blackness and African culture with criminality, right? And we know that's a lie, and that's why I got defeated. Anyway, all right, so that's it. I didn't open up the case, but it's there in the in our group, and I'll look at some comments and questions. I don't know why my thing does this. When I turn to the comments questions, it goes to the side. I can't stand that, but All right, I'm gonna navigate this. Let's see. That's always a weird sentiment, how racists try to stop immigration. This country was literally founded on immigrants. It is found on immigrants, but let me just say this. This country, the only population in the United States in particular that did not immigrate to the United States is the African population who are enslaved, right? So this wasn't, immigration is sort of like circumstances can force it, but it's still a measure. It's a proactive measure. But the African people who would be at the foundation, the human fuel of this nation, did not immigrate. They did not do this out of choice. It wasn't under their own volition, right? It was under the volition of other groups of people forcing us into this, right? I had to tell this white American colleague one day, he made a comment like, everybody in America is an immigrant. I was like, absolutely not. My ancestors did not choose this, and they would not have, right? You interrupted our reality, okay? That being, okay, so apparently they already made that connection. He just put it into policy. Well, yeah, so, people would later on, try to immigrate from other places, but, the fate of African people attempting to immigrate to the United States at that moment in time was much like what Martin Luther King said, is like, integrating into a burning house. We were still on our march, and we're still on our march. This is why we are here working with I Love Black People. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say is that, Pan-Africanism produces something for African people, right? I think I said that, but I just want to highlight that. It does not leave our hand empty. In other words, it produces something that we can weigh and measure and qualify, okay? So us just coming together as, a multitude of ethnicities under the African family tree, or as people who are identifiably Black, is not enough. It does not constitute Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism produces something, okay? So the last reading we had the week before, it gave you those working definitions of Pan-Africanism, and it even put it in the context of how Du Bois expressed it, how Washington expressed it, how Garvey expressed it, how Nkrumah, if I was to say true to that period, how he would express it, okay, in terms of nationhood, right? Okay, and still living in a system designed, right, for someone else's success, and yet we have continued to find more ways to succeed, and despite all the interruptions and hinder the stuff. Exactly. Yes. So someone said, terrorism, about the, waves of violence during the Nadir 1895, 1915, and beyond and before, right? So we know this. Bring down whole town, successful and and let me say this about that. They were burnt down because they were Black, right? They were like, okay, so you got your freedom, you snatched your freedom, and that's a whole nother lecture that I'll do in the future. Maybe I'll put that on our revised, syllabus. So you got your freedom, right? But it's just like, I don't want to say jealous friends. I'm going to say jealous frenemies. They want to see you progress, but they don't want to see you do better than them. So when Black people are looking white individuals eye to eye. So just to give you an example, 1894, Du Bois graduates from Harvard University. Okay, we don't, Northern whites, all right, the institution of slavery has been defeated, but we don't want you here at Harvard with us. You understand? We don't want that. You could be free to an extent, but competing with us, having what we have, having more than what we have, no. Okay, and the contrast and the progress was swift. In 50 years, there's unbelievable progress. Just for a conversation for US-based folks, I think we need to know a little bit more. We've allowed people to rewrite our history. Our most progressive period in the history in the United States in particular is that period after enslavement, that first 50 years. This is why this congressman is saying it is an epic story. And if it were any other group of people, we would praise them. But it's not. These are people that we feel that are a threat to us. Okay. And so we won't praise them because we are threatened by them. There isn't any other story like that in the world. And I don't think we realize that that period is really, we're living in the backlash of it. The waves of violence was meant to destroy all that we created in that first 50 years, which were sustainable, progressive Black communities by skilled and knowledgeable persons who had survived and defeated the institution of slavery. That's another conversation, and maybe something I need to, not maybe, I know, because I'm already sort of doing it. I'm writing about it, but we don't have a narrative where we talk about ourselves as victorious people. The institution of slavery in the United States existed even before the official establishment of the United States. In other words, let me say it a different way, which is that the system of slavery, the institution of slavery, predated the founding of the United States. And it is able to make the peasant class of Europe millionaires overnight. The peasant classes who in their homelands would have never risen above their status in any way. That being said, they would be millionaires and the beneficiaries of wealth that was produced by the human fuel of African people, our very bodies and labor. But we defeated that institution. It's a very interesting story. I mean, it's a story that needs to be told. We defeated that institution. Do you understand the people who have free labor? They're never going to let that go. And we ended it. And that was not part of the plan. It was not part of the plan. I don't want to make this, so US centric, but designated single-handedly ruined Black business. Yes, politically bad. So that period is a period where, in particular, white Americans pretty much said, we're going to squash this and we're going to stop this from ever happening again. And we're taught a very different narrative in the United States. We're taught a narrative that says our high point is when we integrated into American society and gave up all we had to them and put a premium on being with them, but being under their foot. Well, this period in history affirmed and was a confirmation that we could have and did have our own sustainable, independent communities all over this country post-slavery. And although, battered or whatever, that we could rise and do for ourselves and sustain ourselves and even surpass anybody's expectations, even our own, if left alone. Right? And so, I think there's been great efforts to rewrite history and tell you not to reference that period and to reference the civil rights movement period. But we are living in the backlash of the first 50 years. Their mantra really is quietly, never again for you all. Never will you have that opportunity to be safe and build and use all your talents and ingenuity for yourself. They perpetually wanted to create a designated population where we as a people and where we live around the world will forever be extraction sites for their perpetuity and purpose. Yes, but they perfectly to colonize all of our spaces. Yes, of course. So I'm seeing the comments of Octavia. Hi, how are you? Iman. Yes, for 250 years plus the belly of the beast. Yes, absolutely. Enslavement by terrorists survived and emerged. Yes, only 50 years later, right? Really less, but within that 50 years, right? By 50 years, 1915, we're like, it looks like we recovered. And the same whites who were slightly sympathetic to the plight of an enslaved people were no longer sympathetic. Now they are offended, jealous even, right? And violent. They too are violent and endorse the violence perpetuated against Black people, right? Through their silence when not participating. With our souls intact. I think that oh, for sure. I mean, certainly, Octavia, they think that, you know, but differences is we're not them, you know, and that's a whole nother conversation because Dr. Sharshy McIntyre talks about struggling against the beast without becoming the beast. And that's a very important note because we're in a critical time around the world, but also in the United States. What is the congressional record? The congressional I signed in late. The congressional record is when they have a bill before the House of Representatives. When you see, like, you probably see maybe Congress in session, every congressman that comes up and speaks is arguing for or against a certain piece of legislation before the voting begins. So there is, like in court, there is someone documenting every word uttered in those sessions, and that becomes a record, a transcript of it. So as a researcher myself, when I want to go in to see pieces of legislation, who was for it, who was against it, what were their arguments on the floor of the House? Think of it as not 24 session, 24/7, but a 5-day-a-week court where people argue, representatives on behalf of the population argue for or against pieces of legislation. Okay, and there is a record of it, a documentation, like a stenographer, court stenographer documents. So they document everything said in these sessions, congressional sessions, and it becomes part of the congressional record. And they're housed usually at the library, the law library and in Washington, D.C., but sometimes you can access the congressional record at various research institutions around the country. So I went to the congressional record there at the Library of Congress and the law library there, housed it above the Library of Congress in DC, to pull the congressional record on this particular piece of legislation. Yes, we are too forgiving. Yeah, well, someone said forgiveness is to be is for us as well. Yeah, I mean, we proceed, we forge ahead. So the legislation that got defeated, specifically for those of you who are into researching, is called the So I dubbed it, it is referred to historically as the African Exclusion Measure, but I put the case together for the first time in print. It's mentioned in other places, this piece of legislation, but I named it essentially, even though it's in a slight variation mentioned in other places, but I'll tell you specifically what it was. It is a piece of legislation that originated in the US Senate in December 31st of 1914. Okay. It was an amendment to the larger immigration bill due to come before the House of Representatives in January of 1915. What it was simply a two-liner that said to exclude anyone of the Black or African race from the United States forever. It was an amendment to the larger immigration bill of 1915. And it would come before the House of Representatives, aka the Congress, between January 1st and January 7th of 1915. Okay. It originated in the Senate, passed in the Senate, and was due to go before the House of Representatives. It could either be this amendment, it could either be struck from the record, defeated in the Congress, or it would have become part of the larger immigration bill of 1915. It was defeated in the Congress, so it did not become part of the immigration bill of 1915. Okay. Octavia, so this classic debate about already being here and everything, we know, well, some of us know, we know about African expeditions outside of the African continent as early as Abubakari. And some people, they won't even know what I'm talking about, who sails over here to the Americas and actually returns and all of that. When I begin this course, I start with the Journey of Man, a Genetic Odyssey, to initiate the conversation about what it means to be African. And what it means to be African and what it means to be human are one and the same. All the world's indigenous people are Black because humanity is Black. It's one and the same. Now, as a result of Africans migrating all around the world, this is why I start this course, because we got to raise all ships in terms of understanding there's nothing but Africans on the earth. And when I say African, I mean human. And so that's why I show that film in the beginning. To be human means to be African for most of the 200,000 to 300,000 years on this earth. That is the natural state of humanity, African culture, and Black presentation. This thing that goes on now with this whole like indigenous people and stuff like that, these debates about who was here. The United States is no special place. What turns United States to a point of attention or conversation is the arrival of these enslaved Africans, the Africans who come out of Africa not by choice and are forced to build a nation in place that they did not agree to build. So the plight of those particular Africans who I'm a descendant of is what we're talking about here, right? We're not talking about the Africans who arrived here 10 to 40,000 years ago that Ivan Van Sertima cites, and they came before Columbus, or my friend's book, David Imhotep, the first Americans were Africans. We're not talking about those Africans because those are not the survivors of enslavement. Those Africans who would absolutely have a fit, if you watch the film that I shared with you initially, The Journey of Man, a Genetic Odyssey, when you get to the North American continent and Spencer Wells talks to the Navajo are the only group of people who utter anything close to racial pathology, and the Aborigine of Australia also. They give you the attitude that they are anti-African, anti-Black, while being Black themselves. But the Navajo are the only one who utter this Western concept of Negro or Negroid features. They start talking about that. He has Negroid features. So although they are Africans, they are very much ignorant of that. But it's nothing for us to say that Africans were here or there, the Americas or whatever the case may be. You know why? Because all the world's indigenous people were Black upon arrival in their locales. You know, I know that there's a thing going on in the United States. We're not African, we're indigenous Black. Well, where did those indigenous Blacks come from? They came from Africa too. So all the world is a number of African diasporas. You know, like all the world is a number of African diasporas. Indigenous people in America are an old African diaspora. They would die to admit it. And yeah, today we call them Latino populations, all that kind of stuff. Native American populations, the indigenous in the Americas. No, they are African. They're an old African diaspora. We, or I'll say myself, I am the product of an African diaspora that arrived in the last 400 years in the Western Hemisphere. Right? And not by choice. I didn't migrate. My ancestors did not migrate. My ancestors did not immigrate. And we are the ones that upon arrival, who suffer under a racial pathology that emerges in the world by Europeans, who also are an old African diaspora, but into Europe via Eurasia, via Asia. Right. So you saw that all in Journey of Man, a Genetic Odyssey, where it is scientifically proven. This is not like sort of up for debate any longer, you know, like we know this stuff. Right. Okay. So, you know, what I get, okay, so I keep seeing the comments about not every Black person was enslaved, blah, blah, blah. In a society where they implement racial slavery, and I'm going to get off now because it's like, you know, I'm way, way, way over. The point of implementing racial slavery or the institution of slavery, a racial categorization, is that on site, based on your phenotype and physical appearance, you create a class of slaves, okay? And that is for the purpose of exploitation, right? But yeah, so if you ever saw 12 Years a Slave, Solomon Northup was not born enslaved. He was born in the North, but slavery still existed in the United States. And what happened? All they had to do was kidnap him. And he was brought. Why? Because racially, when you have created a racial category that puts Blackness, equates that with slavery. And there's a, on another occasion, I'll give you the history of how that occurs in the United States, a very deliberate thing, right? It happens with Anthony Johnson. He acquires land as a result of indentured servitude. And then they realize, like, no, we want to create a race of slaves because we don't want this to happen. So, but, no, you should not equate Blackness with slave. Actually, when you think of slave, you should think of Slavic nations, the Eastern Europeans that Western Europeans enslaved. That's where the word comes from. When you think of slave, you should a picture of a Black person should never pop up in your mind, just to speak to that point. All right. Yeah, we all have a unique experience. Okay. I hope I answered some of you. Do you find some consider Booker T. Washington conservative? Some people probably consider Washington conservative. But I would just say publicly, I don't think, and if you go back to the historical, documentation of him in the press and whatever was in the public realm during his lifetime, I would say you probably would never really truly know him, because I think he never showed his face. So we wouldn't know who he was without his personal papers that were edited and released in 1970. And in 1970, the Library of Congress edited them, and then they used a very racist intellectual and scholar named Lewis Harlan to do so. That being said, he couldn't thwart what Washington's personal correspondence is. And so we come to see and understand Booker T. Washington in a different way through his personal papers. So I think he had a public face and a private face, as many people do. Publicly, he was conservative. Publicly, he was an accommodationist. But you have to understand that Black conservatism, in the sense that one is not openly advocating for integration at that time, is very much aligned with Black nationalist ideology, in the sense that he wanted to stay amongst his own, and he felt he could build better in that way, or that we could build better in that way without the threat of violence. So, and he was right, that as far as I'm concerned. That being said, he was not transparent about who he was in his lifetime. South Carolina, Booker T. Washington conservative. Tim Scott, senator from South Carolina, presidential candidate, says he was inspired by him. Have you heard any interpretations as such? I don't think Tim Scott is any Booker T. Washington. I don't know. Maybe we'll see, many moons from now, Tim Scott's personal papers, and maybe he's doing something different than what he's doing now. But I don't think so, personally. Yes, I agree with you, Octavia. Conservative back then is different than what conservative right now is. Around the time the Emancipation Proclamation, which was a proclamation, there was a party switch of ideals and went on. My history is a bit rusty, but do I remember that? Okay, so there's a party switch. When you talk about party switch, meaning when Black people go from one party to another, that would be during FDR in the New Deal. Okay. And it's right after, Depression and all that. Well, during the Depression and stuff like that, in the United States in particular. But historically, it's the Republican Party. That's the party of Lincoln that allows, the Reconstruction Amendments to pass, 13th Amendment to pass, all of this kind of stuff. That's a whole nother conversation. Those were really political moves. They were not really they knew that to win the war and to have political power in the nation, they had to co-opt this newly free population. The Republican Party or the Democratic Party could probably care less about Black people. They utilized Black people. But originally coming out of slavery and during the Reconstruction period and early up until FDR, most Black people would be Republican because it is the party of Lincoln. And it is through that political party that Black people are able to push and get the 14th and 15th Amendment, equal protection under the law and voting rights. And so that was the typical posture of most Black people. It is until FDR flips that, okay? But Southern Democrats, Dixiecrats, they were the ones who were, pro Confederacy, Southern states, pro-slavery, fighting for the right to, fighting for a specific state right called, which would allow them to hold people in bondage. The genetic difference comes mostly from the adaptation. Absolutely, right. Yes, the genetic, Octavia, right. Survivors of enslavement, love that. I like the way you put that. Okay, thank you. Sorry, guys, like today I'm traveling and I'm way over. I did not plan to be, I'm super way over. And I apologize for those of you who, it's an inconvenience to, and thankful for those of you who were able to stay. So don't forget the African Exclusion Measure. It is arm yourself with the understanding of that piece of legislation and how we won this time. Okay, and it was for perpetuity in the sense that it went beyond that moment in time to the present time and all that kind of stuff. But also remember, like, it's a model. It is a model that we can implement. It is the model to give instruction to African people everywhere on how to challenge their racist governments everywhere we are. Okay, so thank you guys for staying. The case is already in the group, and that's it. I am because we are. Okay. Sorry, Yvonne. I know you probably have working hours where you leave at a certain time. I'm sorry. I apologize. We should talk about that. Sorry.
Yes, it's okay. Yes, thank you very much for this wonderful lecture. Okay. And also, I would like to thank everyone that stayed on the call. Have a nice weekend. I am because we are. See you next Saturday.
All righty. Bye-bye.